conceptual understanding. He is right that the best way to measure understanding is to measure procedural fluency. And I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to show you with a little bit of data. So if children are not hitting these milestones, we know they are in trouble, and that trajectory is unlikely to change without intervention. So let's see. There are unfortunately lots of myths. There are a lot of myths that teachers really are unwittingly victimized by, because they want to be effective, but they're given bad information. Some of this information is promoted in their training programs. For example, the concept of productive struggle. If you Google it, you will not find a tidy RCT that shows that it works. In fact, you will probably find data. I could cite some data that say it's a bad idea. It can actually cause math anxiety. And yet you'll find hundreds of Google sites that are mostly PowerPoint documents teaching teachers how to use it. So how to use sort of this, at best, unproven practice, and really at worst, harmful practice. So this is sort of a summary of some of the myths that can interfere with effective instruction. There's a really interesting trend in implementation science that is focused now on de-implementation. So we have to de-implement bad ideas in order to implement those ideas that can work for students. If you'd like to read more about some modern math myths and what the evidence actually says about learning, again, some of what Barry just talked about, and we cite the very same people. I wrote an article that is linked there that you can access. It is not behind a paywall, so you'll be able to read it. So only in math, it's fascinating to me, the world of math and the world of math education, I should say, there's this idea that fluency is the enemy of creativity. It's the enemy of conceptual understanding, as Barry said. And this is totally unsupported by the evidence. And in fact, in most other fields, people would say that is crazy. Why would you be opposed to this idea that if you practice your scales on a piano, you will be able to sit down and create? We don't expect 6-year-olds just learning to play the piano to be able to write beautiful pieces for the world to enjoy. Runners practice every day to improve, to get 1 millimeter of progress. That's how real expertise and mastery emerges. This is surgeons. Practice. You don't want a surgeon who is disfluent, who has never done this operation before, to be doing your operation, because if something goes wrong, what we know is that they cannot think on their feet and modify and find another efficient path to save your life. So pilots, same thing. So there's all these other fields where we accept that fluency is a really important dimension of proficiency. And yet in mathematics education, we demean it, we diminish it, and we do this at tremendous cost to our students' learning gains. So what we want to do instead is collect data about how children are progressing in math. Are they hitting these milestones at the expected time points, or do we need to provide some corrective intervention support to get them back on track? We can do this with very brief screenings. They have to be timed. They have to be computation-based. This is what we know. And unfortunately, teachers often will push back on that because they are hearing this different narrative that is really unsupported by evidence, which is about the emphasis of conceptual understanding. And again, one of my favorite things that Barry just said is the best way to understand conceptual understanding is to measure procedural skill, fluency, performance directly. We call this mastery measurement. And this is the modern iteration or evolution of curriculum-based measurement. The worst way to measure in math, we now believe, is to try to sample mathematical performance more broadly, because what that does is it gives us imprecise and insensitive information as a metric to determine what children really need. So instead, we want to do something that's called mastery measurement. And this means that we are narrowing the scope of what we are assessing. We are doing it with very brief always timed assessments. And then we're using that information to change what we do in terms of instruction the next day. And we are changing the measure. So as children hit mastery, we just choose a new target to assess, and that becomes the next mastery measure in this really integrated assessment and instruction process that cycles back and forth and produces this better outcome for learning. So if we screen an entire class of children, we can very sensitively, using the right measures, determine who is at risk. In this class, most children are doing fine, but you see these 3 little orange bars over on the right, and these are the children who we would say need some additional intensification of instruction, okay? But we might see this, and we often see this in the United States, that we screen on an expected grade level skill that is foundational for the instruction that is forthcoming. Like, for example, Lucy probably would not have demonstrated mastery on many of these foundation skills that were necessary for her to thrive in Barry's class. So what we find often is what we call a class-wide problem. And when we detect a class-wide problem, there is no capacity, there is no technically adequate way to determine who is really at risk in this classroom, because there is a base rate threat. There's so much risk that we have to conduct an intervention trial to determine who is actually at risk. And I don't know why my slide is a little discombobulated here. I don't know if you can see it, but this is showing growth of all children given class-wide interventions. So everybody grows. And then you can see very clearly that this is the child here over 3 weeks of data. This is a child who is in trouble. And before we did this little class-wide intervention, 12 minutes, 15 minutes per day, there were lots of children that we would have said were in the risk range. So what we want to do is use class-wide intervention as part of our screening process, using these mastery measures to determine whether we are ready to even identify anybody for individual intervention, or if instead we need to target shoring up core, what we call core instruction, which is the instruction that all children receive in their math classroom. So excellent science-based core instruction always advantages all students. That it is a myth to think that if you benefit some students, then you are hurting other students. No, by definition, excellent core instruction advantages all students. That means your high-performing students, that means your low-performing students. It avoids inefficiencies in instruction. One of the key mistakes that teachers make in math instruction is they misallocate time to specific skills and proficiencies that either children have already mastered, or they fail to allocate sufficient time to really important foundational understandings that then they catch up. So these children become Lucy, they land in Barry's class, and they really did not master the fundamentals, and so they have forgotten how to do the skill. Errors have creeped back in. And certainly they cannot master a more complex iteration of that foundation understanding. So these excellent core instruction avoids and prevents unstable instructional effects. So we want to see all classrooms progressing in a very reliable way. We do this with big data now. We can track at the whole school level, even at a whole district level, or even in our tool at an entire system level. Anybody who is using our tool, we can identify laggers and places that are doing well. And where we see lag, we can populate some information in a coach dashboard to say, hey, let's go and help these teachers, because their growth, the growth of these instructional groupings, is not what we expect it to be based on science. So what we know about intensification of instruction has really evolved. And part of it, and what I'm going to focus on very particularly, is this idea of instructional match. It is not a new idea. It is enabled by mastery measurement. So very sensitive and very direct measurement of skill mastery, which then tells us what we need to do instructionally in the classroom. If I had more time, I would unpack all of these for you, but today we're going to focus on the instructional hierarchy. As I said, this is not a new idea. The first writing about this really appeared in a seminal text in 1978. Herring and Eaton talked about the instructional hierarchy as the way you organize instruction for learners. And this framework was so powerful that it actually underpins future research, like in my field, the research around brief experimental analyses of academic behaviors. So that would be like Tanya Eckert, Brian Martin's, Ed Daly's work, very behavioral kind of work that really was about how do you use assessment to build the right intervention for a learner. It's really the underpinning of what we call personalized learning, although personalized learning is most often not well done. But that is the sort of underpinning, and those are the roots of what we now call, we would call personalized learning. So although this is not a new idea, and perhaps because it's not a new idea, it exists. It exists in many randomized controlled trials, just not as an investigation of this idea in and of itself, because this idea really predated this more modern methodology of randomized controlled trials. So although there are many of us who are still doing this work, and we're trying to be more explicit about experimentally investigating this notion of aligned instruction producing better results for learners. I'm doing some of that work with Robin Cotting, for example. So, okay, so let me explain how it works. When an understanding is new, which we can measure, and we would know that the child is not accurate. The child cannot accurately and independently arrive at a correct answer, let alone explain it. So that we would call this the acquisition stage of learning. And when a child is at the acquisition stage of learning, the goal is simply to establish correct performance. We call that discrimination or stimulus control in the behavioral world. The next stage, once children become accurate, they enter what is called the fluency building stage of learning. And this is what is often given short shrift by teachers in classrooms. So child performance is accurate, but now it's very labored. It takes a higher cognitive load, as Barry was saying. And when that is the case, the child is going to suffer under a model of offering really generalization type tasks, or more challenging word problems, or multi-step problem solutions, or more complex iterations. They're going to suffer under that kind of opportunity, because they are having to devote too much cognitive energy to just getting the correct answer. So what we do during fluency building is we make giving the correct answer easier. And we do this primarily through effective, productive practice. So the goal of instruction in fluency is to produce rapid and accurate responding. And then finally, once children are fluent, then they enter what is called the generalization. Herring and Eaton also call this the adaptation stage of learning. And the goal here is to really do what most teachers like to focus on, which is, the sitting down and creating a piano piece. This is the part of the work that is fun. That's what experts do. But that happens at the generalization and adaptation stage of learning. So here's one of those citations if you want to read about how this work, this notion underpins some really great areas of science. For example, brief experimental analysis in academic settings. So let me tell you why we must time performance to make correct decisions about whether children are in the acquisition, the fluency building, or the generalization stage of learning. So, just without jargon, we can say you could have two learners and both can correctly complete a problem, right? Both are 100% accurate given a problem. And the first learner, let's say that child can answer it automatically, could teach somebody else how to do it, could show you 3 ways to solve it, can explain it while they go. But the second learner maybe has to draw hash marks, or count on their fingers, or find an easier known and reason their way. And so they're halting and they're unsure, but both have the same score. They both have 100% accuracy. That's because accuracy is really a crummy metric. Once you reach really, 100%, you can never do better than 100%. That's a hard and fast ceiling in terms of measurement. And yet there's a lot more to be known about proficiency. And the way you detect the superior proficiency that first learner has is to time the performance. If you give both of those children a set of problems and you give them each 2 minutes to work, the first learner will complete more problems correctly than will the second learner all day long. So it's a great way to sort children. That's one way to think about that. But it's also a way at the individual child level to model additional proficiency. So even in the first learner who is at 100%, we can't show any growth for that child if we only pay attention to accuracy. And yet that child has more learning to do. The way we do it is to time the performance. So what we know is that a lot of teachers will say if children are better than 90% accurate, then they have mastered the understanding that the teacher is trying to teach. And yet we know that if children perform to the left of this criterion, we call this the acquisition stage of learning, the frustrational range of performance. And The frustrational range of performance is characterized by a high error rate. So this is just really a simple scatter plot. This is a real data set, and you're looking at fourth grade multi-digit multiplication, where every dot here, every little marker, is the fluency score on the x-axis plotted against the accuracy score on the y-axis. So what you'll notice is in the acquisition stage of learning, when performance is it's frustrational and is frustrating for the learner, and we are trying to establish correct understanding, that's the goal of the instruction in this phase of learning, that this is where all of the errors are, okay? Now, once children move into the fluency building stage of learning, errors really go away. We call this the instructional range of performance in our measurement models. This phase of learning is characterized by rapid growth and high accuracy. So I wish I could talk more. I wish I had more time. I would talk more about what learning looks like in this phase, but it is easier. It is children are more likely to remain engaged. It feels less frustrating. Growth is superior in this phase of learning if you give the right type of instructional tactic. Then finally, to the right of, like in this case, 80 digits correct in 2 minutes, this is what we call the mastery range of learning, and mastery performance in the generalization and adaptation stage of learning, which is characterized by skill retention and very flexible, adaptable skill use, which is really what all teachers want for their learners in math. Okay, the problem is that when teachers say that these children are proficient, that they have mastered a skill, what happens is we know that if we come back and measure these children in 2 months, they will not remember how to do it. They will be making errors. They will not be able to use this learning to serve more complex skill mastery or even applied skill use, which is what we're all after. I mean, that is what the year-end test is even going to try to assess. That requires this type of proficiency, which we can only detect because of this hard and fast ceiling at 100%. We can only detect that by timing the performance. So we're looking at roughly at this age and this particular skill target, 80 digits correct per 2 minutes would signify that these children are ready for more challenging work. They are going to have a high probability of skill retention and the ability to apply that skill and the ability to use that skill to have faster mastery of new, more challenging content. So if we give the right instruction during the frustrational range, performance will improve, errors will decline. And then when we enter the instructional range of performance, we see an uptick if we give the right instruction, and errors will remain low. And then in the mastery range, performance will ceiling off. That is just what happens. It always follows this pattern. And the tactics that work in the frustrational range of performance, which is when the skill is brand new, it's an acquisition stage of learning, is to restrict the task, modeling, providing immediate error correction or corrective feedback. The feedback may be more elaborate for students in this stage of learning. But once we enter the instructional range of performance, our tactics must change. And now we must use opportunities to respond. That is the jargon way to talk about productive skill practice, opportunities to respond. We can actually quantify an intervention's power by going in and counting what is the dosage of opportunities to respond that are provided within an intervention tactic. And in fact, the National Center for Intensive Intervention is beginning to do that and ask vendors to report what is your dosage of opportunities to respond within this particular intervention that you're asking us to review on our tools chart, which is a great resource, by the way. Your feedback now your corrective feedback can be delayed because children are accurate. So if you're interrupting them to tell them that they got it right, then what you're actually doing is reducing the number of opportunities to respond that you can embed during the practice interval. You can vary the task now. You can provide goals and motivators for more facile improved performance as measured by answers correct per unit of time. And then finally, in the mastery range of performance, you want to provide more task variation, but you might have to bring back some corrective feedback that is more elaborate if children have what we call generalization failures. this effect is so powerful that if you have a child in the frustrational range of performance and you give them the right intervention or instruction, you get this type of growth. But if you give them misaligned instruction, so if you give them a high dosage of opportunities to respond, you get this, what we call the skill by treatment interaction. So you get this actual hit to learning, that we can see this in very large data sets. We see this in our data all the time. Same thing, you can duplicate this effect in the instructional range, where if you give a high dosage of opportunities to respond for children who are accurate, then you get this beautiful uptick. It actually does uptick in terms of growth across sessions. But if you give misaligned instruction, so for example, if you're giving a lot of prompting and cueing and modeling and demonstrating and frequent corrective feedback when they don't need it, you'll actually cause a hit to the learning trajectories, and we can measure this in large data sets. And so of course the same thing in the mastery range. So what we want to do is say, how do we use the science of the instructional hierarchy to power core instruction? And that's easy. We can be sort of logical about it. We use our screening, which I showed you a picture of, using the right brief timed measures to determine that children are mastering these key understandings at key intervals across the course of the year. We can sort of assume as a teacher, if I'm introducing a new topic today or new skill, then what I need to do is first verify prerequisite understanding, prerequisite skill proficiency, mastery, that is. And then I need to use excellent acquisition instructional techniques. That means I don't care about how fast they are. I'm not trying to provide a lot of independent practice because they're not accurate yet. I'm certainly not going to put them into cooperative groups and have them try to discover a correct solution or experience this concept of productive struggle, which all that does is stoke anxiety. It will teach children to hate math. Instead, I'm going to use and emphasize explicit instruction, which benefits and advantages all learners. I can use productive struggle later. That may come in the generalization stage of learning. If you want to talk about how to align tactic with science and use the science of instruction, that's where that tactic could possibly belong, but that's not where teachers tend to use it. But once we have taught the skill, I know my class has had some time with this and I think they're ready, they're accurate, then I'm going to use excellent fluency building every day to build fluency with the skill. And then I'm going to deliver generalization opportunities. Okay, now, if we are working to develop an intervention for a learner who is struggling, this is a very concrete way to use the instructional hierarchy to power an intervention. This is what all the very best MTSS and RTI, response to intervention, researchers do. This is what we all do. This is the way we build individual interventions. We start with a goal skill and we measure proficiency. It's always timed. If the score is, as you saw, accuracy tracks so perfectly with these fluency scores that we can simply use a timed measure and apply a fluency criterion. And that gives us superior information than trying to measure, like Barry talked about, conceptual understanding or accurate performance. Accuracy turns out it's kind of a crummy metric. So you can use answers correct per unit of time and you get better information, more actionable information. So we just measure it. It's a 2-minute measure. And if the child is in the mastery range, we say that's it. We do not require further instruction on this skill. If they are in what we define as the instructional range, then we say you need a fluency building intervention for that particular skill. And if you are in the frustrational range, then we are going to drop down and check the most immediate prerequisite understanding. Again, with a timed, standardized, demonstrated, technically adequate measure. It's not hard to do. Our tool does this. Spring Math does this automated behind the scenes. So then again, if you're at mastery, we're going to give you an acquisition intervention for the goal skill. So addition of 2-digit numbers with and without regrouping. Why? Because we've ruled out that your prerequisite understanding was your problem. And we've now demonstrated, yes, you're ready for acquisition here. And that's what we will give you. If you're in the instructional range, then we're going to give you a fluency building intervention for the most immediate prerequisite understanding. In this case, what we're really isolating, if you read into this, is regrouping. So can you handle just 2-digit addition without regrouping? if you can, that demonstrates that regrouping is your problem. And so you're going to get an acquisition intervention that targets that particular understanding. Okay, so if you're frustrational for addition of 2-digit numbers without regrouping, then we're going to drop down and check the most immediate prerequisite understanding. So all learning, like in my world, I have mapped numeracy to algebra, and we drop in at these screening time points. And if you're not at mastery, we can say, like for Lucy, we could have and would have via a diagnostic assessment process, very briefly, efficiently sampled back and found where her gaps were. And that's where we would repair and build her forward to mastery. So that is how the model works in a very concrete way. And then my final thoughts that I want to share with you is that I've been saying this a lot, is there really is no evidence-based intervention or instructional tactic that works all the time for all learners, okay? And I think this is important for us because there is the math ed world, which is so often uninformed by science. And yet these are the folks who are most responsible for interacting with our learners. And so we really want to empower math teachers to not fear innovation, not be afraid to try a new idea. That's okay, that is fine. Of course, we want to encourage them to look to the evidence base to select the tactics that they might try in their classrooms. But whatever you try in your classrooms, you should be evaluating it locally to make sure that it works. And so if someone says to you that something is too complicated to measure, that's a red flag. That's a charlatan trick, okay? That's fool's gold. It can all be measured. You can measure the effects of your teaching. And again, it's going back to that idea that I started with, which is learning is the most predictable outcome of effective instruction. So if as a teacher, you are looking at whether or not learning is progressing, then you have all the information you know to change what you are doing. If you have the will to do it, change what you are doing so that you can get better results for your learner, which is your responsibility. So we say, always include local program evaluation. So like in my world, we automate this and we do this for teachers at the teacher level because and also at the coach and system level, because we really want principals to know what actions are underway, what are the results right now in my school, where is support needed, are the baby indicators moving in the right direction, what are the barriers that we can troubleshoot to get better results. And at the teacher level, we want the teacher to get this feedback that children are growing. So this is all provided, and this is very important, whether you're using Spring Math or whatever you're using your own tools. You can do this in Excel, you can do this on paper, but teachers need sensitive feedback every week at least to show that their efforts are paying off in terms of instruction. Those are my final thoughts, and I'll finish on this slide with that's the website for my particular tool. That's my Twitter handle. You feel free to message me on Twitter if you want to reach me. I didn't put my email on there. I would have, I just didn't. I just missed that. And thank you for this opportunity. Be glad to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for this very interesting talk. For the moment, we have no questions. I will make a short comment. It's very interesting how the time frame to achieve a task is important, and it reminds me of a student that did an exam with me last week, and of course the exam was timed. Everything is timed, and time was up, and I said time is up, and he was very upset because he said, no, but I know how to do this. If you give me more time, I can finish. And people, just because they are faster than me, they will get better grade. And I answered yes, because I'm also assessing how much time you take to complete the task. And now, after your talk, I have scientific basis for this. So thank you very much. Another question I have is, when you split this into three ranges, frustrational, instructional, and mastery, so you are splitting in three. Is the split in three parts something that is evident when you look at the data, or could you imagine more subdivisions of this process?
My answer to that is I think those three divisions work pretty well. Mm-hmm. In K-12, we're so that effective tactics successfully implemented in K-12 classrooms that I think I always favor simpler over more complex models unless we can evaluate the more complex model and determine that it's absolutely necessary. There's like a great precedent for this because there's a whole field called precision teaching that really came from B.F. Skinner's work in applied behavior analysis, but it relied on this very complex graphing process that nobody ever understood. Teachers did not, really understand it. And it got supplanted or replaced by curriculum-based measurement, which is widely used. So when you see oral reading fluency or words read correctly per minute in K-12, that is curriculum-based measurement, which is used in every classroom in the United States all the time. The reason precision teaching sort of fell away or fell out of favor, it was too complex for teachers to implement. Okay. So I would say, I would be open to it, but I think every good idea deserves research and can be quantified in terms of, does it give you a value add? Like I do a lot of academic screening research, and complex regression models will always favor more variables. But if you really pare this down to like, well, what is the posterior probability of accuracy? Rarely do, often in my world, additional variables are not worth it. They take you a lot more time to collect, and maybe they give you one or two more correct decisions. And in the grand scheme of things, the simpler model is better because it helps you move faster and repeat the assessment later, which is usually gives you more accuracy.
Okay, so this is an adaptation of the Occam-Razor's principle, which states if you have several models that work, just pick the simplest one. Okay.
Yes, that's how I think about it. Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And we move on with Anna Stoke. Hello, Anna. So Anna is a professor of mathematics. She is based in the University of Winnipeg in Canada. She is a professional mathematician, we could say that. And she will be joining us with this talk, what is going on with K-12 math education in Canada. So Anna, please, the floor is yours. Tell us what is going on with K-12. Thank you.
Sure. So I'll just share my screen here. All right. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here talking to you in what is morning here in Winnipeg. So whenever I give a talk on math education, I like to first of all start off with, why it is that I actually care about math education, because I am a mathematician and I'm a university math professor. So why did I get involved in this? Well, there are a few reasons. And one is that K-12 students are my future students. So when I'm teaching students, say calculus or something like that, and they're struggling with limits, it often has something to do with them not understanding the algebra that they should have learned back in grade 10. And of course, math is relentlessly hierarchical. So if they're having trouble with limits, like I said, it might be because of algebra, which could even be because of fractional arithmetic. I could trace it all the way back. I have two kids. One has now just finished her first year of university, and the other one is going into grade 11. And that's actually kind of how I got into this mess. So when my youngest daughter was in school, I had serious issues with the way they were teaching math. It was extremely confusing for children. They weren't spending time on the things that are important. And I co-founded an advocacy group called Wise Math with my colleague, Dr. Robert Cragen. And so we advocated to have some changes in the curriculum in my province. Also, I co-founded a nonprofit organization called Archimedes Math Schools. And I do that as a volunteer. We deliver after-school math classes to kids in grades 4 to 10. And if you're interested in more about what I have to say, because it is a shorter talk this morning, please feel free to look up my C.D. Howe report, What to Do About Canada's Declining Math Scores, when I go into great detail there, okay? All right, so the question is, these misgivings I had when my daughter was in grade school, is there anything even behind that? Well, I'll show you a bit about PISA in Canada, and Nuno is going to talk a lot more about this, and he obviously knows more about PISA than I do. But so here are some graphs here, and you can see So Canada is the red line, right? So, and a lot of people will say, oh, Canada is really great. Like Canada's top scoring country on PISA, right? Well, that may be true, but there's a decline. There's been a decline over time in Canada. And it's also, you know, it's really pronounced in some provinces. So in Canada, education is managed provincially. So we have no national policies on education. Each province does their own thing. And you can see down here is Portugal, and Portugal was tending upwards and then maybe flattening out. And it looked like we were going to hit each other. So it's kind of interesting. But we have seen a decline, okay? But it's, like I said, it actually depends on the province. So I'm going to show you this next slide, which really kind of shows you what's going on. And you'll see, unfortunately, and this is not my fault, but this is my province, Manitoba, the worst performing, the one that's declined the worst, the most, the worst scoring province in Canada. And you can see all these provinces here. This is Manitoba, Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. All those provinces adopted the same curriculum back in 1995, and then it got doubled down in 2006. So you can see this, these are quite significant, some of these declines, right? Like it's rather serious. And of course, when you're looking at measurements, you want to see what's happening over time, right? So that's what we're concerned about. So I'll say a little bit more about my province, that math score has declined actually 46 points over 15 years, and that's a lot. So sometimes OECD says 41 points is about, or 39, I can't remember, about 1 year of schooling. Like this is a significant decline over 15 years. And other really bad things is that, level 1 and 2, you want students to perform above level 2 to be considered numerate, numerate enough to participate fully in society as a numerate citizen. And the percentage of Manitoba students who scored below level 2 actually doubled over that period. And then also very equally bad, the percent scoring in the top range, our future STEM leaders, that actually halved. So we have more students who are struggling, and we have fewer students who are excelling. So it actually has been pretty serious what's going on in Canada. And so we should talk a bit about, why this is happening, like what's going on. And there will be all sorts of excuses, and people have different opinions than I do, but I have some opinions on why this has happened. One, I think curriculum changes. That's an obvious thing to look at, because we have had significant curriculum changes over that time, and changes to instructional methods. A lot of the stuff that Barry and Amanda were talking about, that's going on in Canada too. And then provincial standardized testing has been downplayed, eliminated. And for instance, in Manitoba, it was actually eliminated, except for the grade 12 test, which is at the end of the student's schooling, right? So, and I don't know what it's like in other countries, but here standardized testing is very political. So if you're promoting standardized testing, you might be seen as having certain right-wing political views. It's not fair, it's not reasonable, but that's kind of the way it is. So I'll talk just where did this all come from, right? Like, how did we end up here with these curriculum changes and this nutty sort of instruction? Well, when something happens in Canada, it usually started in the United States. So when they come up with some stupid idea, we usually do it just a little bit later. So in 1989 and 2000, the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics advocated discovery-based learning, which is also often referred to as inquiry-based learning, constructivism, student-centered learning. And at that time, they were advocating that, get rid of standard algorithms. And by that, I mean things like addition with a carry, long division, the most efficient methods for doing arithmetic. De-emphasize no paper and pencil math, or very little of it. Rote practice was disparaged, memorizing rules, finding exact answers. Instead, encourage student-invented algorithms. So even if that involves, like Amanda was saying, tick marks, right? Tick marks, drawing circles, drawing models, etc. More pictures, fewer symbols, more calculators. The teacher should be the guide on the side instead of the sage on the stage. The result was new math curriculum in the US and new math texts based on these principles. And then there was a backlash from prominent US math professors and parents, which has been dubbed the US math wars. Okay. Oh my. So what happened in Canada? Well, like I said, shifts were also occurring in Canada, just not as quickly. And those provinces I mentioned earlier, the ones that really saw a significant decline in mathematics, they all adopted this WNCP math curriculum. Now, the first common curriculum for those provinces was released in 1995, and then the second was released in 2006. And if you remember my slide at the beginning, probably I had the PISA scores from 2003 to 2018. So we kind of see the effects of that. Now, prior to 1995, curricula just varied all over across Canada. And I've gone and looked up the old curriculum for Manitoba to see what it looked like. And in 1978, we had a curriculum that was used until 1995. That was actually a really good curriculum. In 1995, those changes were quite dramatic. So outcomes were moved to later grades. So like fraction arithmetic, which is really important, got moved from grades 4-5 to grades 7-8. Calculators were encouraged. This multiple strategy approach, as Barry mentioned, this is seen as proving that you can understand something. And this is very time consuming and messy. This is all based on sort of discovery-based, constructivist, inquiry-based learning. Now, the 2006 curriculum was actually an extreme version of that 1995 curriculum. So what I've been told is that teachers weren't getting the message and they wanted to pull out the rug from under them. So at that point, that's when standard algorithms were completely removed and even discouraged. But this, you know, and you can have a curriculum, but at the end of the day, they want the teachers to follow the curriculum. And the way this happens is that you get really aggressive teacher professional development. Teachers are often mandated to attend the professional development. They sometimes send math consultants around to the classroom to evaluate them and to make sure that they're following the approach, which is discovery-based, student-centered learning. So here's this kind of really shows how this shift. So in Manitoba, we did used to have provincial exams. Those were all eliminated in the year 2000, except for the grade 12 exam. So here's a grade 3 Manitoba provincial exam, just a screenshot, right? Like, okay, here, do some arithmetic, show me you can do it. Here's a little straightforward word problem, simple division, can you do it? Okay, so that's grade 3, 1987. Before the curriculum changes in 1995, okay? Now here's 1995, all right? So this is essentially, they're testing the same outcome apparently, right? But now you're gonna teach your friend about it and you're gonna explain it in 4 different ways. You're gonna use words, numbers, pictures, arrays, a story problem, and a number line, okay? So that you can see the shift very clearly when you examine the difference between these two problems. And so, you know, the changes to this curriculum, you could read the front matter on the curriculum document and we would read that where our children are being taught understanding and problem solving and critical thinking skills and 21st century skills. And this all sounds really great, but you can't measure these things, right? And the foundation was missing. They pulled out the foundation. So pencil and paper math were discouraged. Standard algorithms were removed at that point. In fact, for some time, students actually weren't even allowed to use standard algorithms. So for instance, when my daughter was in grade 3, that's what was going on. So, and we had taught her the standard algorithm at home for addition or multiplication, and she had to write on a little piece of paper under her desk and put the answer down. That's what was going on here. And instead, students were using hands-on materials, pictures, and models for actual calculation. And I'll show you some examples in a minute. And of course, the claim as always is that this is based on research, right? Parents are told this, teachers are told this, that what you're doing is what the research says you should be doing. Okay, so now about fractions. And I owe this slide to my colleague, Robert Cragen. So, here's a fraction question on the grade 8 TIMS in 2011. And we've got subtraction of fractions, and the answer is D, okay? And how did Canadian students fare? So only some provinces in Canada wrote TIMS, and so I'll show you a few. So you can see the success rates here. Now remember, our fractions were moved to grade 7, 8, and there was an emphasis on models. And like Barry showed in his talk, an example of how they would want students to complete a fraction calculation using models. And you can see here's some Canadian provinces: Quebec, success rate 33%, Alberta 28%. Alberta uses the same curriculum as Manitoba. Guessing 25%, right? Like they really didn't do better than random guessing, right? So students were not mastering fraction arithmetic, which is a really important outcome. Okay, so I'd like to show you some examples of what our textbooks look like. Okay, so this is from a grade 5 Math Makes Sense textbook. And students are supposed to multiply 21 by 13. Should be a fairly straightforward problem. And we see 3 strategies used to find the product. You might think this is okay, well, that's fine. Like we're going to show, here we're going to use blocks, and they're all some sort of derivation of the distributive law, right? So here's one. Here's another one. Okay, here we're going to use grid papers, and we've got the the rows and the columns, etc. And we're going to maybe record on the side. And let's do one more, because you have to make sure you understand what you're doing, right? So here's the third one. Again, it's just an application of the distributive law, but the problem is they never move on from that, right? Like so students are encouraged to actually use these methods for calculation. So I mean, if I have mathematicians in the audience, I'll say that this is kind of like, when we're teaching students derivatives, we start with the definition of the derivative as a limit, right? But then we prove a bunch of things, like we prove the product rule and the quotient rule and the power rule. And students should really use those rules. That's the entire point of the mathematics, right? Like we try and get more efficient methods to do things, and we want to move on to those. And that's being missed. Like I don't have a huge problem, right, with showing students in the first place some of these models, but those are not efficient ways to complete calculations or to do mathematics. So, and this is even worse. So this is even going on still in grade 9 when students are doing algebra. And when I see these things, it just kind of makes my blood boil, because I know my students in university often have trouble with things like fractions. And I see that they spend so much time on this sort of thing in school math. So what you have here is students are, okay, model this polynomial, using, these are called algebra tiles. So here the square is the x squared, and it's not colored in because that represents positive, right? And then you've got the negative 4x, etc. And they would have them adding polynomials this way, etc. My daughter, when she was in grade 9, spent so much time on this. And I mean, it's just really frustrating when students really need to get good at algebra and they're wasting all this time on this stuff. And that's why the outcomes have been moved to later grades, right? Like you need time to do all this nonsense. So my daughter, who's now 16, whenever she wants to get under my skin, she'll say, "Mom, I'm going to do a PhD in algebra tiles." And believe it or not, she probably could if she wanted to. But yeah, so anyway, so a bit about what K-8 concepts are actually important for later success. And you might wonder why I care so much about K-8. Well, that's where it all starts, right? Like that's the foundation. And so, if we can't get that right, we're going to have, our kids are going to have trouble later on, right? Worry about high school later. Let's get K-8 right. So at the end of the day, we want kids to have career options that involve math, right? We owe that to children. Math is an important subject. And a lot of careers involve mathematics, most careers, right? And, algebra is sort of the gateway to higher level mathematics. So we would want to prepare children for algebra. So when we're thinking about what skills we want kids to have in grades K-8, we probably want to think about what concepts we would want them to master so that they'd be prepared for algebra. Okay. And it has been shown that fractions, fluency with fraction, and what I mean fractional arithmetic, right, without the pictures, it has been shown to predict later success in math, which to me is no huge surprise. I mean, we use fractions all the time, right, when we're doing algebra and whatnot. And of course, if you want to be good at fractions, you better be good at arithmetic, okay? Like, and you better be able to do it efficiently. You can't be using tick marks and diagrams all the time. And you do need to have a lot of things in your long-term memory so that you can recall them quickly when you're doing math problems. So for instance, your times tables, again, those were removed from a lot of curriculum across Manitoba. In fact, it was discouraged. Memorization of times tables was actually discouraged, right? So students were encouraged to maybe use repeated addition or whatever, or various little tricks to get their times tables every time they solved a problem. And working with integers and order of operations exponents. And I just put a little disclaimer here, you know, this isn't an exhaustive list. I'm just kind of going through some of the main topics. And also, I'm not advocating for never teaching understanding. I'm a mathematician. Of course, I care about understanding mathematics. I just think, I think like Barry thinks, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about what understanding means. I also think that sometimes children won't understand, and sometimes some of the concepts are really complicated. So for instance, long division, that's actually not an easy thing for a kid to understand. It's easier for them to apply the algorithm, and maybe later they might understand it, and that's fine. And about best instructional practices, because we're always told that children should be taught using inquiry-based approaches, but in fact, that is not supported by research, as Amanda said. And so, for example, Sutton Trust reviewed over 200 research articles and found that enthusiasm for discovery learning is not supported by research, which broadly favors direct instruction or explicit instruction. Instructional methods that do work, reviewing previous learning, the worked example effect, so working through examples for students and giving them lots of time to practice. I mean, that's probably one of the worst things that has happened in math ed, just this calling practice drilling kill, disparaging worksheets, disparaging practice. It's really, really has a really negative impact on students, especially struggling students who really need that practice. Also, they found that less effective teachers often taught math using hands-on equipment, exactly the sort of thing that is being promoted in Canadian classrooms. They delayed the introduction of formal methods until it was felt that pupils were ready to move on, and they encouraged students to work out things for themselves using any method with which they felt comfortable. So exactly the opposite should be going on, right? And here's a quote from Andreas Schleicher from PISA. One of the most debated findings from PISA has been that teacher-directed instructional practices tend to predict student achievement better than student-oriented learning. Consistent finding, clearly visible in both the East and West. So I always suggest 80-20, and by that I mean at most 20% inquiry. Like, why would we spend most of our time using an instructional method that doesn't work, especially with novice learners? Like, I think inquiry-based learning works better with students who are more advanced, right? But and it's not a hard and fast rule, it's just sort of a rule of thumb, okay? So more recently, what's gone on in Canada? Well, we did manage to get standard algorithms added back to the curriculum in 2013, and times table memorization went back there. Even though they're at late grades, they're still too late because they're still doing a lot of the models. Also, I mean, I don't know what it's like in Portugal, but generally K-8 teachers don't have a lot of math under their belts, and some K-8 teachers don't actually fear math. And here, K-8 teachers, they teach all the subjects, and math is just one of them. So they tend not to be math majors. So we did manage to get it a provincial legislation change that Manitoba K-8 teachers have to take 2 university math courses now. It used to be 1. So negatives, again, no standardized tests. So like, we can get all this stuff in the curriculum, right? But if nobody's checking that students are actually learning it, there's no guarantee that it'll get done. And it also, you know, the consultants and the people who promote these fads, these instructional methods that don't work, they can just go crazy. It's completely wild, right? So because no one's checking up to see that the students actually learn the material. And teacher PD still mainly promotes inquiry-based instruction. You'd be hard pressed to find many teacher PD sessions that actually talk about explicit instruction. And in other provinces, Alberta and Ontario are currently revising their math curriculum, but there's a lot of roadblocks, a lot of opposition. The Alberta draft curriculum looked pretty good. They had fractions at grades 4, 5, which would actually be the earliest in Canada, and huge backlash. So I don't know that that's even going to happen. Prince Edward Island did add standardized tests, which has helped them improve their math scores on PISA, I think, but they've been downplayed or scaled back elsewhere. Ontario is requiring all new teachers to get 70% or higher on a math test before certification. But I mean, there's lots of work to be done, and it's just difficult to get anywhere, especially when you have a full-time job as a math professor, right? So it's not easy, and you really have to keep at it. So I usually end with this, and you may have seen this before, and it's kind of funny, but it's funny and sad, because this is exactly the sort of thing that's going on. So you can see the question is, Jack used the number line below to solve 427 minus 316, find his error, then write a letter. Write a letter to Jack telling him what he did right and what he should do to fix his mistake. And the parent wrote back, "Dear Jack, don't feel bad. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in electronic engineering, which included extensive study in differential equations and other higher math applications. Even I cannot explain the Common Core math approach," so this is American, "nor get the correct answer. In the real world, simplification is valued over complication. Therefore," and he just quickly uses the standard algorithm in under 5 seconds. So anyway, it's kind of cute, but all right. So that's it for today. So thank you for your attention, and it was nice to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Anna, for your presentation. I would tell you, if you could speak Portuguese and if your presentation was in Portuguese, I would be sure you were talking about Portugal in your presentation, because we have exactly the same. I don't know how this happens. It seems like bad ideas, they spread. They spread even faster than COVID. They just spread. You asked what's happening in Portugal. Well, now there's a new regression, because these things are cyclic. And I even prepared here to show you where we are standing now. They are changing the curriculum again. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this is from 26th of June 2021, 6 o'clock in the morning. So I translate this for you. Mathematics reform, more mental calculus, well, why not? And then less standing operations. So standing operations is just the algorithm, because, you know, when you want to add numbers, you just put them vertically. So they call this the standing algorithm. So less paper and pencil and more creativity, you see? So this is from June 2021. I am not sure why this happens. I think these ideas are quite attractive for someone who is not into education, because I think the public opinion just reads, oh, this sounds nice, because I like creativity and I don't like boring stuff. So I think students should be more creative and should do less boring stuff. Who likes to do boring stuff? And this is why this goes through the public opinion. And this is a problem we have, I think. I think these ideas seem nice, but in fact, they are awful. And this is the problem. Thank you very much. We are now moving on for our last presentation with Nuno, as soon as I understand how I can stop sharing. Not sure about that. Nuno, can you share your screen, or I must stop sharing myself before?
Okay, I just request sharing. Am I sharing the screen now?
Not yet.
Share screen.
Yes, I just accepted your request, so you should be able to share.
Okay, now I can do it. Okay, very good.
You have a green button at
Yeah,
the
yeah,
bottom.
yeah. Share. Okay, I hope I can do this in, okay. It's taking time. I think it's okay now. Is it okay now, Flip?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So thank you very much. Thank you for to all speakers before me. You actually made a great introduction to what I'm going to say, because as Philippe said, in Portugal, we are struggling with the same realities, and I'm going to talk about it, but focusing on PISA and other international surveys, what's usually called ILSA, International Large Scale Assessment Studies, and what can we conclude from them, or what type of conclusions can we take from these things. So I'm going to start thinking just about the basics, the real basics thing. So I'm going to talk about reading and doing basic arithmetic. And I don't know if you are aware that how bad is the situation worldwide. And according to UNESCO, the situation is more or less the following. In the world, we have 58 of 10-year-olds who are unable to read a simple sentence, and 56 of 10-year-olds who are unable to perform a simple calculation. So this is really very sad. But if we move to more advanced countries, let's say the United States, or if you move to Europe, we see similar results. What happens now is that if we now look at PISA and look at the basic levels of PISA, level 2 and below, in these areas, especially in mathematics for our case, but in all these areas, in sciences, in reading and in mathematics, we see that we have about 20% or even more, 20% of 15-year-olds who have trouble reading and understanding a simple story and who have trouble performing a basic math calculation. And if we go to PISA and see some of the questions that they consider of level 2 or of level 1, you see how serious this is. Europe is the same thing, and I'm going to share with you some basic numbers. These low performers, so OECD countries, low performers in OECD countries, what we have is in science, math, and reading, all about 20%. So these are OECD countries. Now let's think about Portugal. See what happened in Portugal. We are about 20% as well. And let's think about the European Union and look here what happens in the European Union. And in the European Union, what we have here is that we are about 20% now in 2018. Well, Portugal is a very curious example because we started better than we are now, actually. We started better than we are now. And we got worse and a little bit better then, and now worse again. So this is very clear because we essentially oscillated here, a little bit worse, then much better, and then worse again. And if you look at about the European Union, it's the same picture. It's the same picture. So let's look at reading, for instance, or let's look at math because we are discussing math. It's more or less the same everywhere. 22% of 15-year-olds in school have trouble doing basic computations. Actually, Portugal improved, and this is what the OECD PISA report says. Only 2 countries in 2015 were able to reduce the share of low achievers simultaneously in all 3 domains, and it was Sweden and Portugal. So actually, we did something wrong, something correct. We were one of the few, actually 2 countries, who were able to reduce the share of low achievers. And at the same time, we were able to improve PISA. Well, Anna showed great graphics. I'm going to show graphics just about Portugal and try to explain what happened. What happened is that we had a shock in 2000, first in 1995 with TIMSS, and then in 2000 with PISA. We were suddenly confronted with the fact that our results were very poor. So our results were very poor. So we immediately improved, then we kind of stabilized or regressed a bit, then we improved a lot, then we kind of stabilized, then we improved a lot, then we regressed. So it's interesting to understand what these periods were. I have here on top a kind of very rough division of this history of education in Portugal. We have a romantic area just after the democratic revolution, where exams were kind of unorganized. Then we have more pragmatic times, and pragmatic times started in 2003, essentially after the results of PISA were known. And after people realized that we needed some more structured curriculum, some more structured education, some more reliable assessment. Then we had a period here that I call structured curriculum, in which it was very clear during this period that the curriculum had to be structured, had to be correctly progressive, and it had to be demanding. And then now, after 2016, we started a different period that I call here competencies again, where again we were talking about 21st century competence, creativity instead of knowledge, and so on, everything that Anna described so well in the previous talk. So what happened in these 3 periods that we improved was, first we had a shock. Then what we had here is that we introduced exams for 9th grade, and as 9th grade is 15-year-olds essentially. So you see that immediately after the introduction of the exams, the results improved a lot. Then not much happened until this period. And in this period, what happened is that we introduced exams for the 4th grade, or final assessments for the 4th grade, 6th grade, and we kept the 9th grade assessments. And on top of that, we progressively introduced a better structured curriculum, more clearly saying what students should know and how this knowledge should be accumulated throughout the school years. And now we have competencies again. If we look at TIMSS Math 4th grade, the results for Portugal are even more surprising, because what we have here is that in 2011 we are here. And then in 2015, we were able to progress above the average, the OECD average, and then we regressed again. And look at Finland, which is usually the, I don't know, it's the guru country of the 21st century competence. Look at Finland. Oh, wait a second. Now, yes, look at Finland. Finland was here, here, and here. So 2 things are very clear, not only from this graph, just go to any graph, and you'll see that after 2006, Finland started regressing and going down and down and down every year. And this is very consistent. It's even worse than Canada, because Canada, there were some oscillations there. Finland is getting worse and worse and worse after each evaluation. And people start loving more and more and more Finland. So there is a contradiction here. I really don't understand. It's very surprising. So Finland is getting worse and people love more Finland. Now, the case of Portugal is very clear, and this is surprising. People don't believe this. The director of the World Bank for Education didn't believe me when I told him that in 2015, we got above Finland. He told me, no, you are not lying. I'm not saying that you are a liar, but you are exaggerating something. And I said, just go, open your computer. And we did it. And he looked at me and says, my God, I didn't know that. Because no one would believe that Portugal, which is not a tradition, a country known for its education tradition, would overcome Finland. But that's what happened. Now, again, of course, in 2019, we were even below 2012 and 11, even below 2011. So what happened here? Some people say, oh, okay, that's okay. We are going up and down, but what is really interesting are the inequalities. We should reduce the inequalities. We should care about the poor students. We should care about disadvantaged students. Okay, so let's care about them. And look at this. This is very clear. So look at high performers, 8%. 2015, high performers, 12%. 2019, high performers, 9%. Low performers, 2011, 20%. 2015, 18%. 2019, 26%. No, your eyes are not lying to you. It's 26%. That's what's written there. 26%. So what happened is that this decay, this regress here is accompanied by an increase in inequalities. Now you can do this subtraction the way you want. You can do these blocks and so on. It's very simple. Inequalities are increasing, and inequalities increased with a less ambitious curriculum. So these things here are very clear for me, very clear. A less ambitious curriculum, no attention to standards, more curricular flexibility, less evaluation. Okay, increase in inequalities. What we had before. What we had before is an increasing rigor in curriculum, more precise standards, what we call metas, and more evaluation. So more evaluation and more ambition, more rigor leads to reduced inequalities and leads to an improve for everybody. Less ambition, less standards, less evaluation harms everybody, but essentially harms the poor. The poorer students, the students who have a weaker background are those that are more harmed by this type of policy. So we would say, so if this happens, what should we do? Well, we should be, of course, have a good curriculum, have good standards accompanying the curriculum, and more evaluation. That's what we need. That's what we need. Now, one thing you quoted, Anna, an interesting quote I'd like to ask you later if you could send me your slides. That would be beautiful, because you quoted Andreas Schleicher. But if you look at PISA and what they say in the preface, they say in the preface the opposite of what's inside in the reports. So look at data. When you look at the PISA reports, look at data. Don't look at the comments. Look at data and look what the technical report says. And the technical report regarding teaching and regarding inquiry-based says a lot. And I'm going to show you a very famous graph. I don't know if you know this graph from PISA for science teaching methods. And this graph is from the technical report of PISA. It highlights a couple of things. So it's for OECD and no OECD countries, but essentially the ranking is the same for everything, for everybody. Here is the positive association with science results. So results in science. There is no similar graph for math and for reading, but this is a graph that was published. That was the only one that was published. And there were a few studies done after it, but it's very clear. These are positive. So we would say that these type of teaching practices would be associated with positive science scores. And this type of teaching methods would be associated with negative scores. So let's see a couple of them. For instance, the second one. The first one, of course, is student socioeconomic profile. What's the second one? Second one is the index of adaptive instruction. Okay, great. So teachers look at what their students know and try to teach pay attention to their students. Very good. Then the second is the index of The third is the index of teacher-directed instruction. So what are the results from PISA telling you that teacher-directed instruction is what works for people results in knowledge of science, more than knowledge, because here doesn't measure, PISA doesn't measure only knowledge. PISA measures knowledge and what they call competence, that's the application of knowledge. So if you want to apply knowledge, to be able to apply knowledge, then you need teacher-directed instruction. Let's move on. Then we have here index of science-specific resources. Doesn't matter much, which is also very surprising, because usually the education debate is completely dominated by this idea. We need more resources, we need more resources, we need more time, we need more teachers, we need more labs. Of course, this is good or can be good, but doesn't play as much as the teacher-directed influence. That is not as important as teacher-directed influence. Now here, total time per week in regular lessons, not really important. And then what's negative? Index of inquiry-based instruction. So if you want your students to know science, and you want your students to be able to apply science, of course, critically, and the application is a transfer, then don't do as much inquiry-based instruction as the PISA preface tells you you should do. Look at PISA data, don't look at their recommendations. And that's it. Now, another graph from PISA tells you exactly the same thing. Inquiry-based teaching practices. Look, the teacher explains science. Wow, this is very positive. This is important. The students are allowed to design their own experiments. The students do investigation into new ideas. The students spend time in laboratory. There is a class debate about investigations. Students are required to argue, this type of thing, construct arguments about science questions. All this is negative. Okay, so again, I think all previous speakers said the same, and I agree completely. It's like a rule of 80-20. Okay, like a rule of 80-20. Inquiry base is okay. Challenges are okay, but they need to spend a lot of time getting basic knowledge to be able, and basic training, in order to be able to then apply knowledge and then be critical and then discover new things, or not discover new things, pretend they discover new things. Okay, so here is another study. So what we should do is explicit instruction first, then challenging problems. And here is an interesting study. Everything here is duly referenced. It's an interesting study here where you see that there is a sweet spot. So here is inquiry-based methods, and here are teacher-directed methods. So some type of mix, and that mix is this one, is when some too many questions lessons, there is some inquiry-based methods, and in many or almost all lessons there is teacher-directed methods. They prevail, teacher-directed methods. So of course we don't want to go back to some mythic period in time where students had to do rote memorization only with teachers beating them. That's not, this is how sometimes things are portrayed. This is ridiculous. We want to have a dialogue with students. We want to engage students in studying, in discussing and everything. But for that, we need knowledge. And one thing is not opposite to the other. And actually, why is teacher-directed instruction good? And why is unguided teaching bad? Because unguided and disconnected activities, well, what they lead to? They lead to superficial knowledge. So you want your students to have superficial knowledge? No, nothing. Just do some disconnected activities with them. Let them have math activities. One day is triangles, next day is even numbers, next day is angles, next day is straight lines. Then if you do that, your students would have disconnected activities, they'd have superficial knowledge. And I can't help but quoting Alexander Pope, great poem, a little learning is a dangerous thing. I think this is a great poem. Drink deep, or taste not Pyrene spring, the spring of knowledge. There, shallow draughts intoxicate the brain, and drinking largely sobers us again. So what else is PISA telling us? I have this book, and I can't help but recommend this book to everybody. It's very easy. It's open access, so everybody can get the book, you know. So you go to Springer's site, you just write improving, or you go to Google and you put improve countries education, you put my name if you want, and PISA 2018, and you get the book completely for free. I have the first chapter that is discussing the basic results from 10 countries where they have discussed, well, importance of teacher-led explicit teaching is there very, very clear. Estonia is new European star. Estonia is passed over Finland, and Estonia is a much poorer country. They say less student-centered learning, do some balance between tradition and innovation, use a demanding curriculum, because that's the start of everything. Everything starts with curriculum, and then align your high-quality exams with the curriculum. So align everything, make everything coherent, and then we can progress. England talks about how issuing memorization harmed students. Poland about how to be aware of 21st century skills. And a very interesting conclusion is this one. You want your students to be proficient in knowledge application. You want to have your students proficient in creativity. You want to have your students having critical thinking. Okay, so don't center learning on math applications, but center on basic knowledge. And then you can progress. Then, yes, they can have a more active role in society and so on. Okay, and that's it. Thank you very much. You have here my website, which unsurprisingly, it's just my name.org. So if you want, I have almost everything that I've been doing is there. And here is my Twitter. I know Barry and Anna and Amanda have my Twitter address as well. We are following each other, I think, all of us. So thank you very much. Back to you, Flip.
Thank you very much, Nuno. So we have still 6 minutes before the end of the session. Before we say goodbye, we have a question for you, Nuno. It's a question from André Bernardino, and he asks, how do you measure rigor? I'll tell you in Portuguese, como se mede o rigor? I think this question was posted when you were saying, this is my interpretation, you were saying that a curriculum it was more rigorous than another. What I think Andrea wants to know is, how can you tell that? How can you measure? And I think this is the
okay. Well, I can tell a couple of things about curriculum. Thank you. It's a good question. Thank you. Well, there is a clear way of measuring rigor at the very basic level. When we say that students should be able to have approximate doubles, as the new reform in math is saying, what's an approximate double or what's an approximate half? We are not being rigorous. And when we know that students should have the exact result, we are being rigorous. But regarding curriculum, what being rigorous is that it's clearly stated the basic knowledge that students need to develop. And it's not vague, it's clear. We want students to be able to perform this type of operations. We want students to understand this type of concepts and so on. So that's a rigorous curriculum in opposition to a vague curriculum. And the rigorous curriculum is the backbone of everything, because if the curriculum is rigorous, then we know how to construct exams, how to build exams upon it. We know how to write textbooks. We know how to evaluate students. We know how to evaluate the status of the nation regarding teaching and regarding knowledge. Otherwise, we have to rely on PISA every 3 years and on TIMSS every 4 years, which is really not enough for a country.
Okay, Nuno, so you are a very popular speaker, because another question popped up from
Sure.
Renato Suede. He
Very
asks, he asks, how do you interpret the 2006-2009 rise in PISA results you show in the first graph?
Oh, it's a good question. Well, we understand this, and people who are in Portugal understand this very clearly, that starting about around 2000, people started paying more attention to the results. People started looking at schools. The school results were disclosed. Firstly, I think it was in 2001. So school results were disclosed. Then people start looking at data, because in 2001 we saw 2000 PISA results. So people start paying more attention to the results. And this is a culture that permeated the schools, permeated everybody, permeated teachers, permeated parents. We need to know what's going on. And just this simple fact is very important. Then we have a second fact, which is also very important, is the institution of exams for 9th grade. So in 2006, students were preparing for the exams in 9th grade. And this is very clearly a motivation for people to improve their knowledge. As it happened here in these two periods that I described for teams, these two periods were very clear. It's almost a natural experiment. 2011, 2015, 4th grade measured in 2015, are students that entered school in 2011, and they knew they had more focus on math and reading. They knew they had more time for math and reading, and they knew they'd have an exam at the end of these 4 years. Then again, we had more rigorous standards introduced in the middle of this period, and so students knew better what was expecting them. Students, parents, teachers, schools, they knew what was expecting them. They knew they had to work. What happened next period? The exams were abolished. There was some so-called flexible curriculum, and less emphasis on rigor and more emphasis on vague competencies and more emphasis on the so-called inequalities. But as I showed, if you really care about inequalities, you need a rigorous curriculum.
Okay, thank you very much, Nuno. We must wrap up the session. We must be rigorous with time also. I would like to thank all the participants, all the questions, and of course, all our speakers, beginning the last speaker, Nuno. Thank you very much, Amanda and Anna and Barry, for your presentations. I think they were very instructive and very important also for our public here at the national meeting. So thank you, and we'll see each other soon, I am sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.